Hey guys, here we are again. My name is Elizabeth Rogliani, for those of you who don't know me. So last week I made a video about hidden conservatives, people that are self-censoring their views, and I got some positive feedback. It was my first YouTube video, but I also had some questions from people asking me to draw parallels from Antifa and something similar that I saw in Venezuela. I had questions on Twitter, on Instagram, where I'm most active, and on the comments. And indeed, I do see similarities from Antifa and something that used to happen and is still going on in Venezuela. So without further ado, let's jump into it. First of all, what is Antifa? For most of you watching, I'm sure at this point you know what Antifa is. Or Antifa, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but I'm just gonna go with Antifa. This is not an organized group. It doesn't have a defined organizational hierarchy from what people can tell, from what the information different journalists have gathered. This is sort of a loose group that shares the same ideology, that shares the same beliefs, that shares SJW beliefs for the most part. If you Google it and you go to the Wikipedia page, it will tell you that it's a left-wing group that is anti-fascist, which sounds fine, except for the most part they combat ideas that they do not like through, violent confrontation. In their mind, though, it's totally justified. Sort of like a communist socialist idea of we can cause harm to individual because it's for the common good. Funny thing is, Hugo Chavez, the late President Hugo Chavez of Venezuela, used to call the opposition fascists as well. So I would consider myself a member of the opposition in Venezuela, so I would basically be considered a fascist there. So far, these people that have considered themselves anti-fascists have attacked and threatened and assaulted journalists, declared police officers should be fired and even killed. They wore dark clothing and ski masks to cover their face because, that's what upstanding citizens do. And for the last few months, in 2020, which is when I'm making this video, we have seen them go after conservative groups and attack them, even get as far as to killing one of them in Portland. In May this year, President Trump said that the US would designate Antifa as a terrorist organization. Many people laughed. I saw many of my acquaintances think it's ridiculous on Facebook, but based on what I'm seeing these past few months, it is totally justified. And many people that are aligned to the left in the United States politically have supported Antifa, and many left-wing academics have as well come out to defend them. So now, because I believe most of you know what Antifa is, Antifa, you know what that is, you have seen what they've been doing. So now I'm gonna go ahead and move on to Venezuela and the colectivos in Venezuela. And I trust you will be able to find the parallels yourself without me having to be too on the nose about it. Not only parallels, but projection. Because I would say our colectivos are a little bit further ahead in what they are, in the sense of what a group like this can become. So the opposition in Venezuela fear the colectivos far more than they fear police. Maduro relies on them to maintain social order, and he calls them the angels of socialism. The angels of socialism. There's been many situations where members of the opposition gather peacefully, and by peacefully, I mean actually peacefully, not destroying private property, not destroying public property, not beating people up, not looting, not setting things on fire, gathering actually peacefully under the protection of the Venezuelan constitution, which has been abused by the government for years, but the opposition still tries to abide for the most part to those democratic principles that were instilled in the constitution. When they gather peacefully, armed and masked civilians show up to disrupt, sometimes throwing tear gas to disperse those who have gathered, and other times actually firing live ammo. So as I said, we call these groups colectivos, but the UN has labeled them a paramilitary organization that supports the Venezuelan regime. So for a long time, they have served as an unofficial force of the government to deal with opposition, to deal with social unrest, and to confront the opposition. They see themselves as protectors of the cause of keeping social order on behalf of what Chavez started in 20 years ago, his revolution, what he used to call La Revolución Bonita, the beautiful revolution. Maduro has said that he admires them, that they're an organization for the good of the people, and he has said, and I quote, "The colectivos work for society, for the sick, for peace, and against crime," and that they have been around for over 20 years as a form of organization from the people, for the people. So these colectivos actually go back to the 1960s in Venezuela. They formed in working class neighborhoods. They formed to fight for social justice, and they were inspired by the Cuban Revolution that had just happened in the 50s. By the time Chavez was elected in the 90s, they sort of just joined him to support his socialism of the 21st century. Chavez actually encouraged these groups. They were subsidized and even given weapons, whilst at the same time, regular citizens had their weapons taken away. So we don't have a Second Amendment there. It was actually a lot easier for the government to impose gun controls, but to then give weapons to those who were loyal to them. Now, I understand this is very different to where Antifa is now. Antifa is not backed by the US president, but neither were the colectivos when they first started, until Venezuelans elected the wrong guy. Not everyone that considers themselves as part of the colectivos are actually part of an armed group. Some of these people work their social justice magic in a different way. They do community work and they promote government programs. Some of them have radio shows where they promote people's power and, equality. But of course, there are the colectivos, the defenders of the revolution that use their weapons. They carry out extrajudicial killings, kidnapping, they run extortion networks, and control lucrative food distribution networks within the poor communities. They also traffic petrol and drugs along the Colombian border. But they are protected by their government because they're angels of socialism. A lot of the most dangerous leaders among them actually have arrest warrants against them, but they don't care because they feel untouchable. There's actually an instance recently where anti-government demonstrators gathered. The colectivos showed up, fired live ammo, and when the police chief or the director and the director de policía, how we call it, the police director, commanded his officers to pursue the colectivos, what happened? This police chief was dismissed the next day because they did not want him interfering with these groups. Now, keep in mind, you're drawing your own parallels, you are getting to your own conclusions by what I'm telling you. We haven't gotten there yet here in the US. But keep in mind, Antifa here does not have the highest office behind them. They don't have the support of the highest office. In Venezuela, they do. And also, the nation's police was replaced in 2001 by Chavez. So he dismantled the police that we had and put in a new police. It's not about taking away police completely. It's about having their own police that they control themselves, right? I'm asking you to look at the parallels of what the left or communists or socialists do to assert their control and impose their ideology. When they first started out in the 60s, they were simply a nuisance. They were far, far from what they are now. Historically, Marxists, communists, socialists have always used these groups to do their dirty work for them. They might not seem like a threat initially. They might seem weak, even, especially when the government does not back them. But left unchecked, they can become stronger easily. So I'm going to tell you a story. I wanted to draw the picture for you of how the government uses these groups to not get their hands dirty. So in February 2019, there were groups of Maduro's opponents that were attempting to bring supplies such as food and medicine from the Colombian border. However, the National Guard was sent to block them. The National Guard used tear gas and rubber bullets to stop these people, but that didn't really deter the opposition group, which had around 600 people. So because they couldn't stop them, the National Guard was ordered to step aside. And then the colectivos, with their covered faces and their raised fists, showed up with their guns and their motorcycles. That's when the opposition members started running. The National Guard was firing tear gas and rubber bullets. The opposition in Venezuela is used to this. They've seen it for years, so that didn't deter them. But the colectivos started firing live ammo into the crowd. This went on for 2 hours. People were dragging bloody bodies to the street, taking them away from the street, and there is no official count of how many were wounded or killed. Some government officials, however, have claimed that wasn't them, that the opposition is lying, that was Colombians doing that. Meanwhile, at the same time, Maduro has come to their defense, saying that if there's a threat to him being in office, the colectivos will step up and defend the revolution from every corner of Venezuela. That's what these groups are. Socialist uprisings always have a mob of radicals that instill fear in the population to make them fall into place. Of course, that's not the case in Venezuela. There's no socialist uprising. The government is already there. They have cemented their power. They have the military behind them. But for them to avoid raising any more eyebrows in the international community, they use these unofficial groups to maintain the social order instead of using the military or the National Guard or police that they control themselves. Because they can always claim, we don't control them, that's not us who is doing that, but at the same time they're defending them, calling them angels of socialism. So with this, I hope that you can draw the parallels yourselves. What we're seeing right now in the US is a group that is very committed to causing chaos and violence for the sake of achieving their ends. And they might seem like a bunch of weak people, but given the right amount of support, the amount of people in power that can actually help them control crowds and control opposition and control speech, then you might have an issue. So I leave you there. I hope you can draw the parallels. I hope that you got something from this, and leave a comment below. Tell me if you've heard of the colectivos. How else have you seen Antifa be similar to groups of the past? Because I know that this is not just a Venezuelan thing. This has happened historically. The Venezuelan example is just something that I personally have seen, and is the most recent example I can think of. But I'm sure that a lot of you can draw examples from Russia, Nazi Germany, China, etc. Leave that in the comments, and also let me know what you would like me to talk about another time. Cheers.